Available at audible.com. Choir presents The Wages of Grace, a novel. Written by Brandon Dragon. Narrated by Edison McDaniels. September 15th, 1943. He paced her bedroom anxiously, wringing his hands in front of him. How do you know for sure? I don't. That's good, right? I mean, there's a chance it's nothing. Except that I missed my time by almost 3 full weeks, and I've been throwing up day and night for the past 2. Yeah, that's not a good sign, is it? What are you so worried about? He stopped pacing and stared her down. How can you not be worried? She just shrugged. I mean, how are we going to care for a baby? We're not even out of high school yet. They could send you to war in a year's time. I think if you're old enough to sacrifice your life for your country, you're old enough to care for a child. That's not what I meant, he answered while resuming his caged stride. Then what did you mean? How do I tell Henry and Henrietta? How do you tell your dad? With words, how else? But what will people think? For someone who's not very religious, you do carry an awfully heavy load of shame. Isn't there anything? He hesitated as he searched for sensitive words. Something that a doctor can do? Yes, Thierry, there is. So why don't we just do that? Because I don't believe in it. Well, it's just science, isn't it? What is there not to believe in? I believe there are some questions that science shouldn't try to answer. I'm really scared, he said with difficulty. Don't you think I am too? I guess so. But this is your baby, and if I'm supposed to have your baby, then I will, and I don't care what anyone thinks about it. He sighed and sat on the bed beside her. The only thing that matters to me, Thierry, is you. I'd be prepared to walk through the valley of the shadow of death if I knew you'd be with me. He stared at the clenched hands in his lap. She put her delicate hand on top of them. You would stay with me, right? He lifted his head so his teary gaze could meet her eternal eyes. Of course, Hope. She smiled and felt tears welling. You're my whole world, Thierry. I can't believe how lucky I am to have you. He put his arm around her and she nestled her head under his neck. You're going to be the best daddy a little child could ever wish for. Whew, he uttered. I think it's going to take some time for me to get used to that idea. You will, she answered with a smile. She kissed him with her heart at peace and then excused herself to use the restroom. He laid back on her bed with his hands under his head and breathed in the magnitude of the situation. He was going to be a father and a husband. He was nervous about the idea of taking care of a family. He wasn't sure he could pick up any more hours at the grocery store. Should he drop out of school? What if her dad sent her away? He wouldn't. Not if they got married anyway. But if they got married, where would they live? They couldn't afford rent anywhere. He heard her father shuffle some pots in the kitchen. Terry wondered if he had any clue what was going on. If he had any clue that his 16-year-old daughter and her barely 17-year-old beau were about to make him a grandfather. He thought about what his mother would have thought. He imagined that after she got over the initial shock, she would have been happy. He wondered what his brother would think. He couldn't help but think that Marty would be disappointed in him. Marty was going somewhere. His life was destined for something great. Would he think Thierry had just put the kibosh on any hopes for an important life? He sat up and flipped through her school books on the desk. They were so young, he couldn't believe it. They were still studying Shakespeare. But the idea of a baby had sparked in him a feeling that all would be right, one way or another. He would be a family man, and she would be his faithful rock, and his children would be a crown of glory on his head. At that moment, she walked back into the room and put her hand on the doorframe. He looked up, and the ashen look on her face nearly knocked the wind out of him. Terry, she said breathlessly. What is it? I'm bleeding. A lot. Available at audible.com.